Welcome back. Next up, we have Kal Molinet. Kal grew up with a strong thirst for adventure and proving people wrong, with his grandfather escaping communist Cuba in a dust cropper with a toy compass to point north and a knife to fight off sharks. His upbringing was wrought with lessons of the dangers of big government. When not evangelizing, he enjoys applying his security forces military training on urban exploration and maintaining a general air of mystery. Kal, you there? How you doing today?
Swell. I'm doing swell. I want to thank you guys for putting this together. This is a great virtual conference. It's pretty cool to have a moment to share this with a lot of other libertarians. Okay, yeah. Do you just want me to go into it? I was going to talk
just
about.
Jump right in.
Okay, I'll just jump right in. So there's a lot of leaked news. There's a lot of fake news. There's a lot of stories out there that's just trying to. I mean, there's reason to be cautious. There's reason to be fearful, but there's also reasons to be prepared. And I think what's going on right now is a great opportunity to be prepared, to be more self-reliant, to be more of a way prepared for other disasters. In history, there's bubonic plagues. You find that most of this actually comes from China. The Spanish flu came from China. But you find that, I guess in this timeline portion where we're at, it's good that we're not facing bubonic plague portions where 70% of our population is wiped out. And being a pandemic, this is a good, reasonable one still, right? There's still people dying from it, to still be cautious for it and maybe perhaps better prepare for other future encounters, and not just with the virus, but as we were seeing the overreaching arm of the state. And I think there's a lot of good points that have come out of that. And so I'm going to talk about the sunny side of the coronavirus. And, aside from clean sidewalks returning from San Francisco, for example, right? That's a good one. And aside from finding that these liberal comedians can't write a joke to save their lives because they're not surrounded by their casting crew and production team. There are four main good things that I found that are of good use for people to have a better perspective of things. And I know maybe I'll go do like the worst side of the coronavirus another time. But so one of the things I think that is a good thing to highlight is the slow of socialism through universities. You find that a lot of universities have closed down, right? A lot of them having pass or fail. A lot of them are even extending it to the next semester in fall and not opening back up. And I think that's great. A lot of these universities are filled with liberal nonsense, liberal propaganda. You even have Harvard, amazing Harvard, like of all places, they've become very liberal. And that's, you have a faculty adjunct professor, a director of law school's child advocacy program, Elizabeth Batholet, and they're attacking homeschooling. They're saying that that is a threat, right? Today, homeschooling kids account for about 4% of school age children in the United States. So, they want that 4%, but I think it's not just the 4% that they want. They want all of it, because they see that right now what's going on, there is an emphasis in children being back in the home and being raised by their parents. And so they find that to be fearful, to be of, I don't want to say a new norm, because that's always been the norm, right? The way of raising your children used to be that way.
It's undoing their control.
Right. So they're afraid of things going back to the norm, going back to the standard and the way things used to be for thousands of years. So this professor, Elizabeth Bartholet, she says that she views homeschooling as a threat. She recommends banning homeschooling altogether from parents teaching their children. She says it not only violates children's right to a meaningful education, but the right to be protected from potential child abuse. And special emphasis on child abuse, because we'll get to that in a second. And she says that it keeps them from contributing positively to a democratic society, which is a good thing. So child abuse, right? When you look at some of these places in public schools, you find that there still exists corporal punishment in many states. And that when you add up the numbers, like, for example, in 2013 to 2014 school year, over 100,000 students, kids, children were beaten by school officials in public school classrooms. So, when she talks about child abuse, that's one area that a lot of people don't know. Like, do teachers still beat kids? Yes, they still beat children. When people talk about even privilege, like male privilege and female privilege, you'll find the statistics is all breaking down. The majority of the children that are being beat are boys, over 90%, like all the way across the board in pretty much every school district that they have corporal punishment. It's not an environment for boys, and you'll find that the consequences is mostly boys getting beaten up by public schools, right? Child abuse. Another thing that I like to call attention is that under the No Child Left Behind Act of 2002, they found 6.7% of public school students encountered physical sexual abuse, right? So when you include verbal or visual harassment, this is that's 10%. That's 4.5 million children. So,
and that's just looking at the actual things that they consider quantifiable abuse, as opposed to things that, as a culture, we've learned to accept. But like locking a kid at a desk for 7 hours a day, how is that not abuse? I
right.
mean, even adults don't get stuck sitting at a desk for 7 hours a day. They get at least a full hour of lunch break where they can go for a walk or whatever. Most schools have gone down to 20 to 25-minute lunches, and they get no recess anymore. So they're literally abusing the kids by treating them like prisoners as well, not just all of the things they're actually mapping out as abuse. The whole system is abuse.
Right. They're not there to teach you to question, right? They're there to teach you how to follow orders and ask permission for your rights, right? That's eventually what we're kind of facing now as adults, asking permission to use our property and to open our business and to go places. And they're suspending our ability of mobility and freedom of speech and a great host of many other things. You're absolutely right with that. So they find that as a threat. And of course, it's weird that Harvard will find that as a threat since it's a private school, right? So,
As somebody that attended Harvard Law School and took Barthelmett's class, yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. That is definitely a liberal indoctrination center.
you went there? No way.
It is atrocious. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Amazing. But again, on the sunny side of things, right? So that's a horrible thing, right? This just came out like a month ago or maybe two. But the sunny side of things is you're finding that a lot of these public school universities are having to cut their losses with a lot of useless degrees, worthless degrees. And you find like Ohio State University, $30 million shortfall. They had to lay off 140 unionized staff members and 3 faculty members in the African American Studies, Women's Studies, Genders and Sexuality Studies department. Pretty much, I'd say any degree that ends with the word studies has to go. They're useless, they're worthless, and they rig you with so much debt after you graduate that it's difficult for even partners to assess of your marriage quality because they're now just married to your debt, right?
Yeah, it's becoming a couple's enslavement instead of an individual enslavement.
Right. So there's consequences to that. And I think that's a sunny side. I think it's not just for homeschooling prevalent of that increasing, but worthless degrees decreasing. So there's a lot of costs coming, and they're finding that there's a lot of fat that they never needed to begin with. And it's good to kind of have a reset of those kind of going away. Of course, the last thing you want to do, even as a parent, is to send your children to a liberal school to be propagandized by your enemy. All right. They'll come home thinking 1 out of 4 students are sexually assaulted with that misleading, false, lying statistics, and puts them up at odds with men, thinking that they're potential predators. And aside from that, you have not just like gender issues and science issues, but it just seems to kind of turn them against their own parents, turns them against what they were taught.
It does. It creates a very divisive environment because the parent's no longer the person that is in more or less control and a mentorship type role in that child's life. They spend most of their day getting instruction from somebody else who's a boss, and what they need, the teacher wants, supersedes what the parents want in a lot of cases. So the kids lose respect for their parents. They also lose the ability to connect with them because they're never seeing each other except for when they're exhausted at the end of the day and nobody's at their best. So that whole bond that happens with a family ceases to exist by separating people out like that.
Right. Yeah. They set them up to be still children, even at 18. Right. They're still repeating the same
and
courses.
Yet they never really let them be children. I mean, children aren't supposed to have, 3 hours of homework after a 7-hour day. That's insane.
Right. My recommendation for anyone listening in terms of alternatives to public school is you have the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. It's put together by Tom Woods, and it's a great alternative to the mess of misinformation that's out there. So yeah, I think that's a positive. That's a good thing. That's a sunny side of these the pandemic that's going on. Another one I want to bring up is Planned Parenthood facilities are closing down around the world, and I think that's great. There is a loss of life occurring right now. You have currently 90,000 reported deaths from the coronavirus since February. I think the first one was probably in California. And I know there is some caution to believe some of these reported deaths, right? There's people who are mislabeling deaths, and certain hospitals will get certain amount of money for that. That's also true. There's a lot of people.
Some of them they're chalking up as dead. The person isn't even dead. We had one listed dead in my county, and the guy isn't even dead. They had to take that number off of Georgia's rolls because the guy is still alive and kicking. He got discharged from the hospital, sat at home for 2.5 weeks, and he's perfectly fine now.
Right. I think they just wanted to mark him dead so they can fill up the paperwork and get that funding.
I have no idea why they let him walk out of there, but marked him dead. It makes zero sense.
I think he's got to be careful, though, because this leads to other possibilities of him actually accidentally voting Democrat as dead and coming election.
Not in rural Georgia, hon.
But yeah, so you have concerns with that, and I think those are valid concerns as well. But it's not to take away that the coronavirus is not real. It is real. I do know some people who have it. I have my brother has it, and he lives in New York City, so that's a really hotbed for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, an uncle of mine up in Boston has it right now, and he's not doing well.
Right. So I know there's some people say it's not real, but it's very real. But keeping that in mind and keeping the numbers of these in mind, you keep the numbers of, for example, Planned Parenthood. You look at 2017, over 800,000 babies were killed in abortion practices in the U.S. When you calculate, that's over 2,000 a day. That's 2,362 a day. If only Planned Parenthood was just doing, like, they do other stuff. People always kind of point that out, right? They do also STD testing, right?
But so do county health departments and regular OBGYNs and a lot of other options. I mean,
it's not like they're the only people who can do it. If they were only doing HIV testing, great, right?
Then they wouldn't be able to make enough money to stay open. Real estate's not cheap.
That's very true. So you found all over the world, over 5,000 clinics in 64 countries have closed. 554 clinics in the U.S. have closed as well. And so, you can say, yes, there are lives being taken through the coronavirus, but also at the same time, there are many lives being saved and prevented from being killed, and mothers who can continue to be mothers during this epidemic as well. Of course, while they're closing, that's not to say that they can't go to another state to have the procedure of killing their babies done. But at the very least, you can kind of quantify that with these many facilities closed, that the number should be around several thousand. And when you look at the numbers that they do monthly, it's over 6,000 to 6,000 babies are killed a month here in the U.S. And that's the United States alone. So there are lives being saved from this, you could say, right? I would say that's the sunny side of this pandemic. I think the weirdest thing that Planned Parenthood did, though, was on Twitter. There's some people who always feel like they have to comment on everything. They have to say something. They did just that on Mother's Day. They posted on Twitter saying, "We want to wish you a thank you," to all the mothers and mothers on the front line. And it's like a slaughterhouse that kills babies and destroys motherhood is wishing you a thank you, right? What planet am I living on here for that? And of course, there's naysayers on this issue. That's one good thing I like about Amash. He's got a really good pro-life position and stance that goes forward than most conservatives or Republicans. And so he has that going for him. Whereas you look at like even with Planned Parenthood and its foundation, right? There are naysayers who say, well, it's not in alignment with the Libertarian Party constitution or platform, and say, well, maybe that should be changed. There's this part here with Planned Parenthood. Don't forget that the founder, Margaret Sanger, got into it as a means of eugenics to target Black families. And since then, it's accumulated to 19 million dead Black babies. So it doesn't have really good foundations there. It doesn't really particularly do, I never found any good, HIV testing, great. But, like you mentioned, there's a lot of other places.
But again, and even for the cases of abortions that are needed for medical reasons, Most GYN doctors can do them. They're usually available through your regular medical care providers. You don't have to have Planned Parenthood, and you definitely don't have to fund Planned Parenthood in order for those healthcare options to be available if it's something that's really medically necessary.
Right. Some of the arguments that they say that it's always about rape and those kinds of reasonings. Though, when you finally add up the numbers, are less than 1%, right? So,
Right.
are the arguments for the other 9% then valid? Would you agree with that to not kill your babies, right? But I would even
It's
go
just
farther.
for the people that want an appointment quickly, as opposed to the ones that want to have to wait to actually see a doctor and go over their options and then have the procedure done. And I mean, you've dealt with health insurance before. It takes a while to get appointments set up with a regular doctor. And it's basically a convenience thing, is all Planned Parenthood provides. They're not really providing a service that doesn't already exist on the market anyway. They're just taking a whole lot of grant money and stuff of that nature in order to continue doing exactly what other agencies and other doctors' offices are already providing.
Right. Yeah. I say shut them all down. It's great that this many numbers have closed down. I think you can pump those numbers up.
And hopefully a lot of that will change with the cultural mindset that's changing, where people are realizing that, hey, having kids isn't necessarily all that terrible. People actually spending time with kids now, whether it be,
Right.
because they're home all the time with their own kids, or whether it's because their neighbors or whatever are home all the time. And there's a mindset in this country that children are a massive burden. And that carries over into why we have those abortion numbers in the first place.
Right. Yeah. There is a lot of propaganda that goes around saying that, trying to say, it's good to be single in your 40s and have no children. And that's a great thing to do. It's like virtually unheard of, for all of time at memorial. But, you'll find that a lot of stories even coming from these women many years later that they regret not even starting a family. Right. And so there's a way of like ruining women's chances to have family, right? This propaganda, and I think that's hurtful. That's hateful. Feminism hasn't done anything great for women at all. Has done them no favors.
Well, I mean, somewhere around the right to vote and, get a job and a bank account and own land, that was about as far as it really had to go.
But at the same time, it wasn't like not even all men could vote. So like,
I understand, which was a
yeah.
problem in general, disenfranchising people that are of sound mind and body simply because you don't like the color of their skin or their wealth level or their gender is completely against the alleged principles on which this country was founded. I mean, obviously, the original Constitution made it very clear that females and colored people did not have any kind of rights. However, as we've moved forward, we've decided that women and people of color actually get to be people too. Big progress.
Well, I guess in terms of,
around,
I guess the argument could be like no one should have the right to vote away anyone's rights.
Exactly.
Right? So they brought them into the game of voting away other people's rights.
Well, not just the voting side of it, but also the being able to own a piece of property without having a man as a signatory on it, being able to have a bank account. I mean, there's a couple basic existing in the world things that basic human rights. And that's not just for women's rights, that's for everybody except white males' rights. But we pretty much resolved all of that around 100 years or so ago. So beyond that, a whole lot more isn't really necessary.
You attribute that to feminism, though?
That was the original first wave feminism, and that was where it should have stopped. Second wave feminism started getting very destructive towards the family, and third wave feminism has nothing to do with femininity whatsoever. It's just let's be second-rate men, which is disturbing.
The first wave feminism that I'm familiar with are the ones who passed out the white feathers to men who did not send themselves to be slaughtered on the front lines of war. And this took place in England, and the feminists there would give white feathers to men who they perceived to be cowards for staying home side and not throwing themselves as a lamb to the slaughter of war. And those were considered first wave feminists in England. So I think they have shaky history.
That's not really a feminist movement if you think about it, because nothing they were doing was actually advancing women's place in society. All they were doing was shaming people.
Right, but they called themselves feminist. I think a lot of these issues in terms of women's rights and stuff like that didn't really particularly come from a lot of these feminists. So that men love their women. Men want their women to be happy. Men build these great things for women. I think that in terms of their love for women, yes, their grievances, they want to address that. I think this is something as a social cultural shift together coming towards providing, like owning bank accounts. Absolutely. I don't think that is so much as something that men has always been against. They've had women monarchies. Right? Women have been in many positions of control and owning huge swaths of lands and armies. And this sort of stuff has been around, and I guess in terms of an appreciation of women for 2,000 years, I would say since the Catholic Church started promoting the ban of killing young girls because they're not boys. And that was like a pagan thing. And lots of people would just throw their girls out the street, little baby girls, because they weren't men that could do farm work and such. And the Catholic Church had to come in and end that practice, that they're also children of God. I think in our culture, we have a love for women. I think that people want to find real examples of a hate for women. Let's broaden our scopes and look elsewhere, like towards the Middle East. I think here is a vastly different comparison and how we treat women and the freedoms that women have in comparison to elsewhere in the world. But I think, I think that's a great thing. Women should be able to own land. Anyone should own land, I think. And that's promotion that what's going on with the state. They want to remove that connection with women and their family and move that connection to the state, for the state to be the family instead.
Or their boss, or whatever other situation. I mean, most women that are single parents have jobs, they do stuff like that, but then their job, their career becomes their family instead of their actual family.
Right.
It's not that most of them are dependent on the government. It's just a matter of when you have to dedicate 40 to 65 hours a week to a career, you're not dedicating that towards making sure that your kids grow up happy and healthy and your home life works out nicely and all of those things. Even something as simple as having time to garden or something of that nature to make sure that your kids can eat healthier, cooking real dinners. That's why we have an obesity epidemic. Nobody has time to cook anymore.
Exactly. I think, so you just brought up another side point of that. It would be that it's great that it's brought back the family together, the children together, the mother and the father together, and having some time to be grateful for that. And perhaps it could be a good thing in that it's brought back traditional gender roles for that, traditional positions. And not to say that women shouldn't work, but there was a time where like the household is work. That is a job. Rearing children is a job. Maintaining and helping the whole family structure be kept together and be as like the foundational glue. That's job. That's work.
It is a full job, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's always the female that's best suited for it. I've seen quite a few couples where the dad was by far the better nurturing, mentoring type parent. The mom was definitely one of those that needed to go to a job every day.
Yeah. I've seen those
People
too.
work out their own balance, but
Right.
kids definitely need full-time parenting.
Right. I think
not being outsourced to daycare centers and nannies and schools and
public schools especially. I think though, when you look at there's certain jobs though that are very stressful. I think I think this lends to the reason why it led to these traditional gender role positions. Not to say that this has to be it for everyone. Like I said, everyone's different, every family's different. But the pattern towards that was that a lot of the roles in the jobs out there are very stressful. Men biologically can handle that stress. That's why they're sent to war. That's why they're sent to construction sites.
Go stand in a kindergarten classroom with 25 kids in it and tell me that's not stressful. Then come back and talk.
Women have a love for those kids, though.
Not always. Otherwise, we wouldn't see the abuse rates we do in public schools.
But you see, that's true. But you also see why 77% of public school teachers are women. They're drawn to that nurturing aspect of it.
To some degree, in a lot of cases, it's just girls whose parents insisted they had to go to school and they became education majors because it's the easiest degree to get.
And even if it's the easiest degree, that's just something that gravitates to them naturally. And there's a lot of interesting studies have shown that it's not like a stereotype or anything like that. Men like going into these like building stuff underground and getting dirty and oiled and having in that kind of wilderness of things. And it requires a certain amount of stress to kind of endure that.
I don't think it's as much the stress so much as it is that men tend to have a more task focused style of approaching what they consider accomplishment. So if it's something that they can tangibly do, whether it's fixing a car or designing a building or the caves like you were talking about, it's that very right-brained analytical problem solve problem, problem solve problem. Whereas women have a more connective type of approach to what they're looking at. So you'll see more women going into fields like law, psychology, stuff of that nature. And it's not necessarily out of a nurturing, it's more of a broad spectrum type of look at the world and looking at how a problem plays across a wide thing, as opposed to needing that structural, I can see the problem, I can solve the problem and move on to the next thing, that appeals to a lot more of the masculine brain.
Right. So there are differences in that.
Because women have very stressful jobs. They're just stressful in a different kind of stress, as you
right. Okay. So that's a better way of saying that. There are different stresses that they handle better than the other.
Right. Yeah. And the neural connections in the brain, when you actually watch the way they work, they map out differently when women look at problems for the most part versus when men look at problems for the most part. Obviously, there's exceptions to it, but in general, you can look at the way their neural connections are mapped out and you can see the way they're addressing a problem, whereas men focus most of their energy into certain hemispheres in the right part of the brain. Women tend to take in the left brain rather. Whereas women tend to take it and cross back and forth between the two hemispheres a lot more, but never really focusing a whole lot of energy into any one lobe of the brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Going back to your mentioning
psychology.
No. Going back to your mentioning, like they're kind of encouraged to go to fields of education and stuff like that. You know, you can also say they're also encouraged not to be stay-at-home moms. They're encouraged to not look at that as equally valuable. And equally important.
And that was something very damaging that has happened to our society. People took being a mom and being a homemaker and turned it into this, oh, well, you're either not good enough for a career or you're a slacker or whatever, not realizing that managing a household is really a two-person job. You have the one person that is bringing in the resources and you have the other person that's managing the resources and the children and responsibilities within the home.
Right. You're birthing like the future generations of what it is to be American, right? For the future success of our civilization. I know that is an enormous responsibility and a beautiful thing that women can do. And I think society has done what leftist culture has done is trying to demonize that and say that that's not valuable and don't spend time even thinking about it. You're better than that. Choose a career and just go with that for your whole life and ignore the whole family aspect of things.
Well, we have a consumption-driven economy. If people had time to stay home and fix things, sew clothing, cook food, all of those things, then we wouldn't have a need for as many big box retailers and restaurants and all of those other things that keep the tax revenue coming.
Right. They find pushing women in the forced work field is another tax revenue source and another way.
It also drives down the overall value of labor, which then forces more people to have to go into that same situation because the cost of living goes up and you end up with the value of labor going down, the cost of living going up, just because you have so many more people in the workplace and you really have necessary jobs.
Right.
It just becomes a giant circle with the money that could have been completely passed over if people weren't constantly needing to hire somebody to do all those things that they would have had time to do if they weren't earning the money to hire the people to do the things.
Right. And the Federal Reserve has been no friend to families and devaluing their money. Right. And being able to support a family on one income, for example. Yeah.
You'd be surprised how little money it takes to support a family.
Yes, that's actually very true. People actually get very ingenious with the ways, like they up their game like 100 times, realize this is the real thing now. It's finally at like the adult phase and time to pass on the next family that was passed on to them. That's very true. But I think that's one of the sunny side of things, as you mentioned, a closeness of families and hopefully a good evaluation of those kind of relationships. And kind of bringing back more nurturing family relationships with their children instead of sending them off to public schools and strangers to raise them instead.
Right. And somebody that's hired to take care of a child isn't going to give them the same kind of affection and coaching and one-on-one development that they would get if they were working side by side with family members or, neighbors, close friends, people that are actually emotionally invested in that child instead of just being there for a paycheck.
Right.
And there's also that sense of entitlement and spoiling that you see among kids who know that the other person's job is to keep them happy and healthy, basically. So they can get away with a lot more than what they would necessarily with a parent whose objective is character development primarily. Because even teachers, they have to toe a certain line. There's only so far that they can, they can't even hug a kid in a lot of cases if the kid's emotionally upset, or they can't, spend that extra time to coach the kid through how to work through a problem or why what they did was wrong and figure out a good individualized, for lack of a better term, punishment or consequence for what it was the kid did wrong, because they don't have that kind of time. They're not getting paid to care that much. They're getting paid to keep the kid alive, more or less happy enough that they don't get fired, and reasonably healthy. That's it. Right. And you're not going to get the same level of empathy coming from that kid as they become an adult because they were never shown it and had it modeled to them when they were growing up.
It's a good thing, then, you can say, that they found public schools to be non-essential.
Yeah, I like that. Liquor stores are essential, but public education is not.
Right. I'm glad we established that. That is a truth now. We can carry that forward in the future to always remember and not go backwards.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to last that long. Even a lot of the homeschooled people now, they're actually just doing public school curriculum at home. They're not really homeschooling, which is a very different approach to how a child learns versus just sitting there and doing worksheets all day because they need a stack of paper at the end of the year.
Right. And you made a good point about relationship with children in terms of that. I remember hearing that there's some schools now that are banning having a best friend because right, some kids don't. So, no one must also have a best friend. So yeah, it's weird how they kind of isolate you and kind of separate you. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, they're kind of passing a lot of those similar kind of restrictions today.
They're creating a generation of sociopaths.
Right. Right. So I'm going to move on to the next one, which I'm going to touch back on that later in terms of Lord of the Flies, because it's an interesting story I came across with that. The next main great sunny point of things is that preppers were right. And I want to say,
we were.
Who's laughing now?
People were laughing at me before, but now all of a sudden when they don't have eggs and they don't have food, they're like, oh, how do I do this? I was like, if you'd have listened to me a year and a half ago, you'd have this down pat by now. Right.
At the very least, it's pushing people back to having to re-examine what it means to be self-reliant, independent, and going to people like you and us how to learn more survival trades and skills. It's looking not to always kind of rely on the government for your life, for your livelihood, for example.
Not to rely on anyone really for it. Even to be relying on grocery stores right now isn't very dependable for a lot of people in the country.
Right. I do miss eating steak.
Yeah, all those people that were like, why would you eat beaver? There's perfectly good stuff wrapped in cellophane at the grocery store. It's like, well, now I can still get beaver. Can you still get a steak?
Right. Yeah, I had a friend was telling me of him canning meat, and that is something that you can do.
Yes. You need a pressure canner. Don't try doing a hot water bath can with meat. You'll get botulism. You will die. Don't do it. But if you have a pressure canner, it's really easy.
Pressure canner. I remember that.
Yeah, pressure canner.
I actually found chicken of the woods over the weekend.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, huge chicken of the woods. I think it's called like Letoporus. Its Latin name. And yeah, that does taste just like chicken. It rips apart and feels just like chicken. And then when you cook it, it's got like this orange, I guess you put your spice and everything, but it looks, you can do like a fajita thing. You can put it in with, I guess we called it cream of mushroom chicken of the woods soup.
There you
go. But yeah, so I think there's a lot of good opportunities here for a lot of people to kind of re-examine their surroundings in the woods and going towards more of a self-reliance. Don't training your body, right? I know gyms are closed, but there's a lot of ways to still be fit. Get concrete blocks and just kind of make your own fitness center in your backyard, lest you be caught on camera like that obese two sheriffs from Ector County that went shutting down that bar in Odessa, Texas. And, their guns are kind of like hanging off their stomach and kind of pointing at each other. And it's quite a sight. And you think like these people are there to serve and protect. And it's like what, Denny's?
No. They're there to draw a paycheck and feel big because they have a fancy costume.
Right. Yeah. They're there to protect waffles, and serve themselves as many burgers as they want. Don't be caught on camera like that. It's a good opportunity, I guess, to a lot of people who are having health problems, who are obese, to realize that is a problem. And now you have this situation where they're on their gyms, they're closed, to kind of re-examine your health, your diet. People always talk about what their personal information is being put out there and harvested by Facebook and everything. It's like, well, look into what's going into your food as well, right? That's also equally important. But yeah, the preppers were right. And I think that has caused a lot of people and helped a lot of people to go to these protests armed. I think what happened here in Richmond, that's where I'm from, we did the Richmond gun rally, and there was over 50,000 people there. And a great many of them armed and no violence. It showcases the different narratives that the liberals always point at, all guns kind of equal violence. But it showcased that nobody in that kind of mass, in terms of militia and groups of people, will get arrested. And I think it's something to show of not just an intimidation, but the capacity for violence that we have, I think is very important. And I think it helped inspire more people around the country to be a lot more ballsy, I can say, especially in terms of what happened in Michigan recently with the showdown at the Capitol and bring in guns. And now they've done something that is I've never heard of. They shut down the legislative branch of the Michigan government. The media and the politicians.
Well, at least they're not going to get any more oppressive laws.
Right. This ends now.
Hopefully they also decided to cut off their pay while they're not working.
Right. Yeah. It's weird. It's the non-essentials telling the essentials what to do and if they can make a living. Right. Because the politicians are very much getting paid right now. I think it's horrible what they're doing out there, but it's great to see how the people there, in terms of these militias, and being more inspired to be more ballsy and be armed and to
utilize the Second Amendment. The reason it was written as a threat to the government. The citizens are allowed to keep guns regardless of what you think, and if you guys get out of line, they're permitted to shoot you. If you want to exist, you follow these rules.
Right.
The Constitution was terms and conditions for the government, not for the people.
Right. The Bill of Rights. Right. The Bill of Rights isn't for us. They're telling what the government cannot touch, cannot override.
Exactly.
Right. I think, exactly. It's the government that should be afraid of the people and not the other way around. And looking at you, Northmen. And I think it's a great opportunity then for a lot of people, not just for preppers, but for people realizing, yes, guns are awesome. They're a good thing to have. And there's been a skyrocketing demand of more guns. And you'll find people forming even local militias. We have one here called the Ron Paul Militia. And so it kind of fits perfectly with our platform being pro-gun, pro-life, and pro-God. And that's we carried that portrait around at the Richmond gun rally with us too. And it was amazing to see a lot of people knowing who he is too, and silent appreciation, that's Ron Paul. And it was amazing. Yeah. He's also very much, I love his video that he had a while ago showing about the firearm that he's holding and the rights that you have to it. Preppers were right. Who's laughing now? I think hopefully everyone can be laughing together if the big boog hits off and we find ourselves in a much better place of liberty than before. And it's not that difficult to start a militia, just getting your friends together. There's a lot of information online in terms of things you can learn in terms of not just hand signals, but formations and shooting together is a great thing. It's really about a camaraderie of friends. And a lot of people think that these militias have to be like government created or anything like that. It's like you look at the first.
It's the opposite.
Right. Yeah. They don't need government training. The militias of the American Revolutionary War were not government trained. They started off as this Minutemen and hunters.
In a lot of
right.
cases. I mean, if you learn the woods and you learn how to be stealthy enough to sneak up on an animal, you can probably sneak up on an enemy as well.
Right. And they did a great devastation towards the British when they were doing their guerrilla tactics as well. So yeah, militias are great. I think that's the sunny side of things is more preppers. I think a lot more of that is it's on its way. And I haven't heard anyone making fun of them in a long time now. So
I've been making fun of a couple of the people that are deciding that now they need to get prepared. And they have like the idea that being prepared means going to Walmart in the sporting goods aisle and just buying one of everything or something of that nature. It's like, you should probably learn some skills before you start buying a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, there's some people that are trying to figure out what's going on, and it's kind of funny to watch them fumble through it. I don't want to laugh too hard because I don't want to discourage people, but
baby steps.
Yeah. It's like watching a baby learn to walk. It's funny.
Right.
You know they're going to figure it out eventually, but that doesn't mean you can't laugh when they fall down.
That is very true. And you're always there if they have questions.
Exactly. Not that they want to listen to the answer, but
Right. And that leads to the fourth one here. I think there's this the sunny side of things is that we're now more suspicious of government, and there's been a lot more pushing back than I've ever seen before. Because usually in the past it's like one area of the country, like name of that ranch out in the Bundy Ranch. And I think that's the first time they ever showcased this opportunity where civilians have their firearms pointed at government officials, at agents, and these agents didn't shoot back. Right? They're looking at that. That's the second American Revolutionary War start off right there if they were to. Right? So they're finding that engaging groups of people that are armed is not a very wise thing to do. They can't trump the argument in terms of that engagement. Right. I know there was the Bunny Ranch people who some of those went over and took over a government facility out, I think somewhere out in Montana, somewhere out west. Now the government can say you're trespassing. Now the government can say they have an argument. But at the Bunny Ranch, that's private land. And that's what brought all those people out there. They can't really trump that argument, so they had to back off. I think that also has helped with this cause too. Like the American Revolutionary War didn't start off with like, boom, right now we're just upset with England. It started off with a series of different events leading up to it. I think that's also
increases in taxes, decreases in freedoms until the people just got fed up with it. And they started forming little groups that were discussing it and maybe training to get rid of the soldiers, started connecting more of those groups together, and the revolution happened.
Right.
And it didn't take anywhere near a majority. I mean, 3% is all it takes.
Right. And that was enough for people to say, like, you know what, they're right. I've been thinking about it too. And there's a group that's out there doing it. Like, I think I'm going to go join them as well. And it doesn't help. And I'm surprised. It doesn't help with Netflix's Waco that's certainly going out there right now and doing a kind of a really good, decent job and providing a good perspective on the situation that most people don't have or were never even aware of the situation that happened there. It doesn't especially increase the love for government after watching that.
Right.
And I think these kind of things have kind of helped people to be a lot more rebellious towards these acts. You find Elon Musk has done a great service in this area and sowing seeds of dissent in terms of going against Alameda County in California and reopening his manufacturing operations. And he says that, we're going to reopen and these people need their livelihoods, right? They can assess their own risk. Or if you want to stay in, stay in. If people want to take the chance and choose their own path, then let them have the freedom to do it as well. And he reopened in spite of the ban. And of course, now Alameda County they want to save face. Didn't come out to arrest them or stop them. They just said, okay, well, you can reopen next week. We'll let that happen. It's like, no, we're already open now. So if you want to do something about it, do something about it. And I think that's a great way for even businesses to start pushing back. And I think it's great to see not just here and there.
Well, I'm
But
pretty sure the reason Governor Kemp opened us back up here in Georgia was he was afraid of what would happen if he actually made the Georgians angry. People were saying, look, we're already doing all of these extra safety things. There's no reason we can't have our businesses back. And I think he was afraid of the Michigan equivalent happening here. Only, I don't know if you know the difference between people in Georgia and the people in Michigan, but overwhelmingly we're better armed and a lot less as far as fans of government go. So I think it may have just been worried about political suicide, but there's also a pretty good chance that it had to do with he didn't want a bunch of angry Georgians showing up at the Capitol with guns.
what a sight that would have been, though. They just still go to the Capitol with guns.
Well, they do for different other rallies and stuff.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, same thing in Virginia. People forget, like, our motto is Sic Semper Tyrannis. It says it's a virtue, a woman standing above a tyrant, speared, dead. Right, and that's Virginia, and that's our culture. And people forget guns are a part of American culture. We're not like the British in terms of, like, we have to hand over our guns and our bread knives and everything. It's that
self-reliance on which this country was founded, and that includes being able to defend yourself,
right?
Whether it be against an individual enemy or the government or wild animals. It doesn't matter. The people that moved here came here because they didn't want to be told what to do back in Europe anymore, for the most part.
It's taming that wilderness and being able to protect yourself from those dangers. And those dangers are not just in the wilderness, but are out there as well in terms of politicians.
Well, I mean, that's what started a lot of the various immigration waves that we had from Europe. Was the governments over there were getting oppressive to the point that the people over there were like, oh, well, there's America. Let's go over there.
Right. I think that's a great, whenever a British person talks about guns over here, it's like, I always like to think, like, we should have just crossed over the Atlantic Ocean and finished the job.
Well, you have to kind of understand that they're used to being ruled by a bunch of people that, basically only got to rule them because their bloodline said so. So coming up with dumb reasons to justify government's been in their history for quite a while.
All right. A good thing that's come out of all this, I would say, our business regulations are being questioned. Here in Virginia, for example, the regulations against beer and wine takeouts have been lifted. Yeah. There's no delivery permit needed. I think people are kind of seeing these kind of licenses and permits as tax scams, right? Mm-hmm. If they're there to kind of protect the consumers and all this sort of stuff, and consumers feel protected, why do we even need these to begin with? And you can have your businesses that are all about accreditation, all that stuff, but government is not about that. It's another tax source of revenue for them.
It's extortion for the right to earn money on the king's land.
Right. It's telling you to give them money for permission to use their own things.
Right.
And I think that's helped a lot of people even push it even further with lawsuits against their own government administrations. You have gun store owners in Massachusetts suing their own government for placing gun stores as non-essential businesses.
But what I don't understand is why Massachusetts even let it get that far. I lived there for 6.5 years, and their gun restrictions are insane. You even have to have a concealed carry permit to buy pepper spray in that state.
Wow.
Why do the people allow that? That means you have to be 21. That means all of those 18 to 21-year-old females that are the target age for rape and on-campus sexual assault, none of them are allowed to have anything on them to defend themselves. And that's supposed to be a state that supposedly cares about women, but they're not even allowed to have pepper spray. Right.
They'll say the right to defend yourself is not essential.
Yeah, I beg to differ on that one.
Right. I think
here in Georgia, you can pick them up at the Publix checkout. You just go right next to all the little magazines and candy bars. There's little cans of pepper spray. They come in different colors and keychain shapes.
Right.
That's why I live here.
Right. I think this kind of pushback and being suspicious of government has also led to being suspicious of other governments like China. People forget China is still a communist government. And a lot of the products that they buy from China, even though it's cheap, doesn't mean it's great. There's a lot of faulty equipment that comes from China. Even masks that have been sent to places in Europe have been found to have already been used and unoperable.
That's nasty.
Right, yeah. I think people have this assumption thinking that everyone's equal, and they forget, like, the peoples in different regions are not equal. They have their own culture, Right? Not all
Right.
cultures are equal. And I think it's okay to distrust cultures that are far different and incompatible with yours. And remember, looking at China and looking at the communist culture that's in that region, it's one that eats dogs and cats by the millions, right? So it's okay to
Never
distrust.
had dog meat. It's actually pretty good.
No, stop. I can't eat dog.
And Bobcat barbecue is one of my favorites.
I'll eat a
So
wild
you're kind of
animal.
selling us hard.
I can't eat a dog. A dog is a man's best friend. They not be able to go to heaven, but
I wouldn't kill the dog to eat it. However, in a lot of cultures, it's a massive insult if you're offered food and you don't take it.
I'll gladly insult them. Yes, I'll bring them civilization that we do not eat pets happily.
Well, those aren't pets. I mean, they raise them like livestock. It's no different than me eating my rabbits. Yeah, some people have pet rabbits, but I eat my rabbits.
Right, but we're Americans. We don't eat dogs here. The moment that you have, like, we don't even have dog fights, right? We don't even have chicken fights. That is any mention of a cruelty, abuse to a cat or a dog. If you have a business, you're done forever.
You can raise livestock humanely, meaning not fighting it for entertainment, and still intend to eat it.
Like dog in America, eating dog.
There is nothing wrong with eating dog.
Yeah,
personally, I'm pretty attached to my dogs. I wouldn't eat my dogs. However, I would eat dog long before I'd starve.
Well, that dog can be very useful in helping you get food, right?
Only if it's trained. Otherwise, it's just going to destroy food and chase off any other food you want to eat.
I think the dog is, if anyone's ever seen A Man and His Dog, an old film that came out in the 70s, great love for popcorn and a great assistance in finding food. I think having guns and pets like dogs by your side is a great American thing. I don't think about it could ever come to the picture. I'd rather starve than eat.
A lot of people love their horses. A lot of people eat horses. Horse tastes delicious. I mean, it's just one of those things where choosing to eat stuff like that, I'm not knocking anybody over it. Leaving your kid or your elderly out in the freezing cold to die because they've become too much of a burden to take care of them, that I have a problem with.
Do you have a problem
choosing your livestock for food?
What about, do you have a problem with open air wet markets and taking these live dogs in front of people and putting them in large casks and just burning them alive with
Okay, that counts as the inhumane way of raising animals. Sort of like if you look at the way we raise a lot of commercial chicken and pork here in this country, it's not humane. It's really disgusting. If you went into most chicken houses, those big, long chicken barns, and you saw the conditions that your food was living in, you'd never want to eat it again.
Right.
But the chicken I raise here on my farm is nice, clean meat. The eggs are healthy. I love eating that. I just don't like to buy the stuff at the grocery store because it's gross.
Right. I think a lot of people can learn a lot from Joe Salatin of Polyface Farms here in Virginia. He's a great leader in terms of how to sustainable farming and how to take care of animals and humanely prepare them for food. And don't forget this dogs. It's cats too that they eat.
Yeah, I eat bobcat semi-regularly, and it's delicious. I trap it all in my woods back there. The barbecue you can make with bobcat is better than any other meat.
What animal won't you eat? Bats?
It depends on where I got them. It's sort of like, bats are like raccoons for me. It depends on where they grew up. I'll eat raccoons out of the woods. I'm not going to eat them out of the cities or the suburbs because they're trash pandas. Bats, sort of the same way. It's a matter of how many chemicals and how much junk they're ingesting versus how fresh their living situation is. If it was a bat that I was raising them in my own bat houses and in their own little aviary, I'd eat it. However, ones that live out in the wild have a tendency to attract a lot of parasites and bacteria that I wouldn't ingest.
All right. So you're an outlier. Most of Americans would agree that eating dogs is a horrible thing to do.
I know, but most Americans also think it's weird to eat beaver. So we're just gonna.
But give them saying beaver, you can eat that. They'll say that it's animal abuse to eat a dog or a cat.
Yeah, again, most Americans that I have encountered believe that the only way to have truly humane meat is to buy it on a styrofoam tray wrapped in cellophane. I have heard arguments against my fishing, hunting, trapping, raising of livestock. Everybody's got some reason why what I do is wrong and what they do is right up until the grocery stores are empty. Then what?
Right, I'm eating dogs and cats.
There you go. And I'm telling you, you'd really like bobcat. It's like an entire animal that has the texture of pork tenderloin.
They look too majestic and rare for me to want to eat.
They like to kill and eat chickens.
Yeah. Who doesn't?
So I trap them. Well, exactly. Except for that, those are my chickens. So I'm defending my property.
Right.
And since the animal died anyway, I'm not letting it go to waste. I'm going to eat it.
Right. They forget too. A lot of vegetarians, like, your food is defended by people protecting the property against animals that are going to come in to eat your food.
Not to mention all of the animals that die taking care of those fields, between plowing and stuff of that nature, the harvesting combines. If they're not eating organic stuff, a lot of the pesticides that are sprayed on there kill all kinds of animals. I kill a lot fewer animals the way I live than most vegetarians do.
Right. I think I want to.
We're running out of time.
Yeah, so I'll wrap up here. So what's the future? I think the future is rebellion. We're talking about Revolutionary War and everything. I think a few days ago marked the first American Book Rebellion that took place in 1771. It's called the War of Regulation. It was about people fed up with corrupt law enforcement, excessive taxes, suffocating regulations, and it led to an inevitable fight between 2,000 farmers and 1,000 Royal Militia Army at the Battle of Alamance in North Carolina. They lost. They said because for a lot of reasons, maybe because they're leaderless, but this is before the first American Revolutionary War start off, like 4 or 5 years later. And I think that's, again, a lot of precursors that comes to inevitable conflict that people may say, right? Is it inevitable? Maybe, right? Can it be peaceful? Maybe. But, it's difficult to find a situation in history where people had peacefully found their way to freedom and not through maybe armed conflict. But we have shown armed conflict in Michigan, and that has shut down the government. And that's amazing. That's a first. I think we kind of should look to that. In terms of armed conflict, I think we should look to our faith as well. I think you look at the situation, for example, how in Romania, they overthrew their communist warlord, and it was through prayer. It was through a Christian pastor named Laszlo Tux. He criticized the regime. He stood his ground against the Red Menace. He stood his ground against their secret police. He criticized communism. In his sermon, he said, we don't have to support their dictatorship. We don't have to support dictator Ceausescu. And that led to the police and the government trying to shut him down, trying to evict him out of his house, trying to shut down his sermon. He was protected by the people in his village holding candles and holding onto each other as a ring of protection to protect him from getting nabbed by the communists. And as people were coming home later that day and seeing what was happening they rallied to his support. And in a few days, the entire country was in an uproar. It ended several days later with the dictator, Nicolae Ceausescu, dying by firing squad on Christmas Day. And this is in 1989, 31 years ago. And together they came and they resisted. And this is something to kind of remind people, just stand your ground. These people stood their ground and they succeeded. They overthrew their dictator. They overthrew the problems in those countries. Is conflict inevitable? Maybe. If it is, then we should be prepared. And hopefully our courage and our bravest may be as bold as Laszlo Tux. And I'll wrap up with this. And want to thank Daniel and you for hosting this and putting this together.
Thank you for coming on, Cal.
Yeah, it's great to have Daniel there at the gun rally in Richmond. He's an amazing guy. With those watching and listening, stay liberated. God bless you. And remember Duncan Limp.